This series is specifically about BigQuery, but BigQuery is one product of many that make up the Google Cloud platform. So I'm going to start by showing how BigQuery fits into the larger picture. If you're already familiar with project level roles and permissions, then feel free to skip ahead to the next video. Okay, they're gone. Look, if you're brand new to Google Cloud, it's really not that hard. The first thing you got to do is create a project. Projects organize all of the cloud resources that you want to use, and most of my clients have lots of projects. In our example scenario, we're going to create a brand new project to store your Google Analytics data. Then we're going to give your data engineer, Carl Weathers, full access to view and edit this data. When you activate the Google Analytics integration, BigQuery will create this data set for you. Now, I've already created a project and I've added some sample data to BigQuery. So I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, so here's the example project I've created. It's called BigQuery IAM example. And if I click into the hamburger menu and go to BigQuery SQL Workspace, you can see what I've plugged in here. This is my project, BigQuery IAM example. This is my project ID. When I expand this, you can see the data sets inside my project. I've created 3, and we're going to walk through different use cases with these: financial data, Google Analytics data, and user data. Now, external connections is something else. You can kind of ignore that for now. The Google Analytics data in here is actual Google Analytics data from my blog. I've just imported 1 day's worth of data from July 1st, 2023, and we'll use that as our example to grant access to Carl Weathers. Now, a data set is just a container that's used to organize your data. The actual data is stored in tables, and those tables live inside of a data set. If we flip over to my example, you'll see I have a data set called financial data. When you expand this, there's one table inside of this data set called revenue sample. You can click on this table and you can see the schema, transaction date, product name, transaction revenue. If you click preview, then it'll pull a couple of rows, and you can see this is obviously just some very simple fake data that I just created for this example. So, in summary, when you store data in BigQuery, it will be saved to a table. Tables are organized into data sets, and data sets live inside of a project. Now, there's one more tier above a project called an organization, but not all of your projects have to belong to an organization. Organizations are useful for large enterprises with lots of projects, and your company needs to create this organization for you by using either Google Workspace or something called Cloud Identity. If you have a Gmail account that you use to create a Google Cloud project, your project will not have an organization. For the purpose of this training, all you really need to know about organizations is that some of the features I'm going to show you will only work if your project belongs to an organization. When we get to those features, I will let you know what they are. But back to our scenario. You've set up the BigQuery integration and the data is flowing in. At this point, let's go ahead and give Carl full access to view and edit all of the data that we have stored in BigQuery and Google Cloud Storage. Now, this seems kind of simple, but you actually can manage access to BigQuery data in 3 places. To grant someone access to all of the data in your project, then you can navigate to IAM and Admin and select the IAM menu. You can also manage access to data directly within BigQuery. This is where you go if you want to get very specific about what a user can see, and you want to give them access only to specific data sets or tables. We're going to start with the most simple scenario and grant Carl Weathers access to all of the data in my project. So financial data, Google Analytics data, and the user data. Okay, so I have created a user in my own workspace for Carl Weathers. You can see here, this is carl@ken-williams.com. And I can start off by verifying that Carl cannot access my data in BigQuery. And I do this just by copying and pasting a link to the data set, to one of the data sets. So I'm going to grab this link that should take him to my financial data set. I'm going to paste it in Carl's window. And when this loads, you're going to see an error. If I try and drop down the project to see what data sets are inside of it, I can tell that this project exists, but I cannot see any of the data. I can't see any data sets or anything. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my master admin account, which is me at ken-williams.com. And I'm going to navigate to the IAM and admin window, which is located in your menu here. Now, first thing I'm going to do is click Grant Access. And my principal, the entity that I'm granting access to, is going to be Carl at ken-williams.com. Now it's time to choose a role. So let's explore the differences between roles and permission. There are lots of things that can be done in BigQuery. Read data, create tables, run scheduled queries, etc. Each of these things is governed by a permission. And there are a total of 145 different permissions that you can choose to grant very granular access to team members who need to do specific tasks. A role is just a group of permissions, and you can grant a user access to multiple roles. Right now, there are 13 predefined roles for BigQuery, which is much easier to manage than 145 individual permissions. You can find the list of roles and exactly which permissions they each enable by navigating to IAM and admin roles, and then clicking on any role that you see. IT security folks will tell you to follow the principle of least privilege, which means only grant a user with the minimum access that is required for them to do their job. If you need to be strict about following this principle, you could do this by creating custom roles with only the permissions absolutely needed by the user to do their job. However, anytime someone requests access, you will need to understand what they're doing, and you will need to then grant them only those permissions that they need to do it. So you'll have to be very familiar with all of these permissions and what they exactly do. Now, as I mentioned, BigQuery has about 145 permissions at the recording of this video. Google Cloud Platform in general has close to 2,000 across all of its products. So choosing individual permissions for each request can get very complex very fast. BigQuery has extremely flexible access controls. And so you can decide the level of control versus flexibility that's right for your business. Most of the companies that I consult for are on one end of the spectrum or the other. They're either granting full access to everyone because no one is taking security seriously, or they're locking down access so tightly that no one can get any work done. But BigQuery can support any point on this spectrum, and you'll need to evaluate your risk to determine where you want to fall. Your risk is dictated by the type of data that you're storing and where it's geographically located. My advice for a company who is trying to fall in the middle is to use time-bound roles. This means that you're not micromanaging every single permission, but you've got a small number of roles that you commonly use. You understand what these roles allow, and you've documented who should be able to use them. And you avoid granting permanent access to any role so that every 3, 6, or 12 months you can reevaluate if the user still needs access to this role. Service accounts are a little different. Service accounts usually I grant permanent access to, but it kind of depends on what the account is and what it's doing. So since a service account represents an application, not an individual user, you'll want to weigh those separately. Okay, so back to our example. We need to give our data engineer, Carl Weathers, 3 roles to access all of the data in BigQuery and the data that we have in Google Cloud Storage. So first of all, let's navigate back to the IAM window. We're going to grant access right here to the new principal, Carl at ken-williams.com. And the roles we are going to grant Carl access to are BigQuery Data Editor. As you can see here in, let's go back to it, BigQuery Data Editor. This gives him access to edit the contents of the data set. But we're also going to need to make him a BigQuery user. This is necessary to give him the permission to run jobs against those data sets. So I'm going to select that one as well. And then finally, I'm going to also make Carl a storage admin. Now, a storage admin has full control over Google Cloud Storage resources. Again, that's important for most data engineering jobs. So I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to create conditions on each of these so that these roles will expire at the end of 1 year from now. So I am recording this in July 2023. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a condition that ends in Q2 2024. Whoops. At the end of Q2. So what you do is you give it a title, and then you'll choose a time condition with expiring access. And then you simply choose the date, which Q2 is going to be June 30th, 2024. I'm also just going to copy that, save it, and I'm going to apply the same to the other two roles. And there you go. So this will grant Carl access to all three of these roles for 1 year, at which point we'll reevaluate if he still needs that access. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to go back over to Carl's window, and I'm going to refresh the page to see if he has access to this data now. Now when I refresh the page, the first thing you'll notice is I can now see the schema of a table. I don't see the error anymore. This is perfect. I've got all three data sets showing up. I can also do a quick test. I'm going to run a query against this data and make sure it will allow me to do that. So I'm going to just select the transaction date. I'm going to sum the transaction revenue. And then I'm going to group it by date and run. And it doesn't like my query. Expected error. Oh, I forgot by group by one. Run. And there we go. So it let me run a query on the data, so we are good to go. Now we can turn our attention to Tobias. Tobias is an analyst. He's creating dashboards. He doesn't need to get into BigQuery and create new tables or anything like that. So his access can be a little bit more restricted.